If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission.
Shalom, shalom, Israel. Forgive us for the delay. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of some technical things to iron out, but we are here and ready. Tonight's lesson, we're going to be going into a doctrine called Zionism. Zionism and the Balfour Declaration. I want to get a quick scripture or two. We're going to start off in the book of Revelation, chapter 2, and verse 9. It says, I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. So this is, he's saying, I know your works, your tribulation, the things that you're going through, the life that you live in. He said, and I know your poverty, but thou art rich, speaking of the Spirit, because we have, first and foremost, we're the Most High's chosen, right? That's the first way that we're rich. But on top of that, we have Christ. Even after all the different things that our people have done, the different captivities, the diaspora, the captivity that we in right now to this day, there's still hope. There's still a silver lining. There's still an opportunity for this captivity to be turned and for our people to be saved. We rich. We're blessed. He said, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So, mind you, this was written long before there was ever any concept of Zionism, a Balfour declaration, a people in, that land proclaiming to be Jews, right? Let's go from there. Let's go to Psalms, chapter 94. And verse 20. It says, shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by a law? So not only is he saying, because it's a rhetorical question, the throne of iniquity should never have fellowship with us, but he's saying, which frameth mischief by law. That's one of the identifying factors. Are they framing this mischief, this deceit, this harmful intent, this maliciousness with a law? I've heard plenty of people say that, right? Oh, that's illegal, or this is illegal. Well, slavery was legal. There's plenty of things that have been in history with established society that was legal, but was unethical, that was wrong and wicked. So, without further ado, let's go, Salaki. Let me turn this to the PowerPoint, and let's talk about this Balfour Declaration. All right, let's talk about it, and the history of Zionism. Mind you, this is a very recent document and hasn't even been around for 100 years. But wait until you see what's inside of it. So, Zionism. I don't know if you've ever heard this concept, but we're going to get into it. The concept of Zionism. It says Zionism. It's a Jewish nationalist movement with the goal of the creation and support of the Jewish national state in Palestine, right? In Palestine, the ancient homeland of the Jews, Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Zionism originated in Eastern, listen to this, Zionism originated in Eastern and Central Europe in the latter part of the 19th century. So first and foremost, again, it has not been around that long. But on top of that, who was in Europe in the 19th century? We're talking about the eastern and central parts of Europe, right? Theodore Hezrel argued, if Jews were forced by external pressure to form a nation, they could lead a normal existence only through concentration in one territory. First and foremost, who was the external force pressuring them to form a nation? I've seen that quite a few times. There's still Zionist leaders to this day, and Jewish advocates that come out and they say, oh, we've been kicked out of every country we've ever lived in. We've been kicked out of, 100 and however many countries in the past, century. So the whole idea was, okay, well, they're deciding if we're going to be a people, if we're going to really portray ourselves to be Jews, then we're going to need a centralized location where we could actually be a nation. In 1897, Hezro convened the first Zionist Congress at Basel, Switzerland, which drew up the Basel program of the movement, stating that Zionism strives to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine secured by public law. So that was the goal of Zionism. That was the main goal. They wanted to have a central location that they could say is their land, that they could say is their place, that they can say this belongs to our people. And go figure, they chose the land of Israel itself because they're saying, well, they saying we Jews, we Jewish, let's go back to Israel. Crazy part about it is the prophecy in the scripture says once the Jews are back in Israel, it's going to be nothing but leadership and rulership, having servants, being immortal. So what's going on? The center of the movement was established in Vienna, where Hezro published the official weekly Die Welt, or The World. Zionist Congress met yearly until 1901, and then every 2 years. When the Ottoman government refused Hezro's request for Jewish autonomy in Palestine, he found support in Great Britain. In 1903, the British government offered 6,000 square miles, or 15,500 square kilometers, of land in Uganda for settlement, but the Zionists held out for Palestine. So that's a fun fact. The British government was initially going to offer them land in Uganda. And there's two reasons that didn't happen. I'm not sure if I mentioned them in the PowerPoint, but I'll mention them briefly. One of them was there's something called, I believe it's the Suez Canal. Let me verify that real fast. Make sure I'm not saying the wrong canal. The Ben Gurion Canal, right? Oh, while the Suez Canal, a vital waterway connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, is located in Egypt, Israel does not currently have a functioning canal connecting these two bodies of water. So, but that was one of the invested interests of specifically putting this people into Israel. It was also the creation of a canal, a lot of money, a lot of merchandise. It put them in a really good position. But they very nearly were going to have their land in Uganda, and they were going to be the whole Jewish state was going to be formed in Uganda. But unfortunately, they held out, and so they were given land in Palestine. It says, at the death of Hezro in 1904, the leadership moved from Vienna to Cologne and then to Berlin. Prior to World War I, Zionism represented only a minority of Jews, mostly from Russia, but led by Austrians and Germans. Go figure. So a lot of the Austrian and Germans were, obviously a lot of them were Jewish at this time, right? It developed propaganda through orators and pamphlets, created its own newspaper, and gave an impetus to what was called a Jewish Renaissance in letters and arts. The development of the modern Hebrew language largely took place during that period. So even the language of these people is very recent. Within the past 100 years, 120 years, it has not been around very long at all. This is a big, what they call the Renaissance of, the Jewish race. This is the Jewish Renaissance. So a lot of their actual culture and their language, their land, a lot of this was recently established, recently founded and put into purpose or put into writing to be able to say, okay, these are the people or these are the Jewish people. This is all very recent. Prior to this point, they didn't have a central location where they could say all Jewish people are from and all Jewish people reside. They didn't have massive communities in Palestine. And matter of fact, that actually all kind of leads into the conflict that we've been recently seeing, even though I know there's been so many different wars and rumors of wars, right? It started off with the whole Free Palestine thing, then, Russia and Ukraine, then it's Israel and Iran. I mean, there's so much going on, it's hard to keep track. But this one has been ongoing for many years, practically since the establishment of the Balfour Declaration and the concept of Zionism. But we're going to get into that. Upon the outbreak of World War I, political Zionism reasserted itself, and its leadership passed to Russian Jews living in England. Two such Zionists, these are two of the most impactful, especially public members of Zionism, or excuse me, not members of Zionism, but advocates for Zionism and Zionists themselves. Chaim Weizmann and Nahum Sokolov were instrumental in obtaining the Balfour Declaration from Great Britain and on November 2nd, 1917, which promised British support for the creation of a Jewish national home in Palestine. The declaration was included in Britain's League of Nations mandate over Palestine in 1922. This was one of the first, if not the first, public address of any nation of the world at that time that had supported there being a settlement in Palestine for the Jewish people. So this was like a big deal. And this was basically the catalyst for everything else that took place under the umbrella of Zionism. This is, it kind of put pressure on other governments. Someone outright came and said, we support, the Jewish people having their own land. We support the Jewish people having their own communities. We support them specifically establishing themselves in Palestine. And it very could have, had they not held out, it very could have been their community was going to be in Uganda. And more than likely, the Balfour Declaration still would have gone forth just under, with the support of them having a place within Uganda as opposed to Palestine. So what was it, right? We're talking about the Balfour Declaration a lot. What was the Balfour Declaration? Simply put, the Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. So this is, let me look at this real fast. This is before the Ottoman Empire fell, right? About 5 years before the Ottoman Empire fell. During this time, there wasn't a Palestine. This was considered the Ottoman Empire. So, again, all of this is super recent. 103 years, right? And during this time, I think it was on record there were maybe 50,000 or less Jewish people actually living in the land of Israel, actually living in the land of Palestine. It's very small communities, right? Small communities, minorities. If, we talk, obviously we're here based in LA. LA has a lot of little communities, especially within the upper parts, right? You got Little Korea, you got Little Italy, Little China, just these different communities that are already established. That would be the equivalent of these communities suddenly having a large superpower, right? At that time, a large superpower coming out and saying, we support these people having a bigger land or, a reserved space in the city, and being granted not only a lot of support, they were given a lot of funding, and if not directly through the British government, but through, what was his name? Rothschild, actually, right? It's in here. It says the Balfour Declaration was issued through the continued effort of Chaim Weizmann and Nahum Sakalau, Zionist leaders in London. All right. Following Britain's declaration of war on the Ottoman Empire in November 1914, it began to consider the future of Palestine. Within 2 months, a memorandum was circulated to the War Cabinet by a Zionist member, Herbert Samuel, proposing the support of Zionist ambitions to enlist the support of Jews in the wider war. So mind you, Britain is going to war with the Ottoman Empire, right? This is, what I want to say, 8 years before the Ottoman Empire fell, right? 8 years. So they were, the British government was already at war. The Ottomans already controlled this region, and the British government is trying to take it from the Ottomans. And essentially, this was the beginning of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire itself. There is no more, well, not as we know it, an Ottoman Empire as it was at this time. They went to war with the Ottoman Empire, which collapsed in 1922. And after that war, came out after gaining control of the region, came out with the Balfour Declaration, publicly supporting Zionism, and even having at that point claimed a lot of that land, because the Balfour Declaration was published in 1917, while the the actual Ottoman Empire didn't fall until 5 years later. Where is it? Right here. November 2nd, 1917, right? Then the actual declaration, Britain's League of Nations mandate over Palestine in 1922. That was right after the Ottoman Empire fell. So Britain is going to war trying to secure that land, clearly already in the works of coming out and supporting Zionism, the work of, the two prominent Zionist leaders already in effect, and Britain is securing this land to be able to hand it over for the Jewish people to have an established place to live, literally in Israel. It says the first negotiations between the British and the Zionists took place at a conference on February 7th, 1917, that included Sir Mark Sykes and the Zionist leadership. Subsequent discussions led to Balfour's request on June 19th that Rothschild and Chaim Weizmann draft a public declaration. And that was the same Rothschild that funded a lot of the communities that actually are established or were going to be established shortly after in Palestine, right? So, obviously, war. By late 1917, the wider war had reached a stalemate. So this is the war of the Ottoman Empire and the British, right? This is 5 years before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. With two of Britain's allies not fully engaged, the United States had yet to suffer a casualty, and the Russians were in the midst of a revolution. A stalemate in southern Palestine was broken by the Battle of Beersheba on October 31st, 1917. The release of the final declaration was authorized on October 31st. The preceding cabinet discussion had referenced perceived propaganda benefits amongst the worldwide Jewish community for the Allied war effort. So, the declaration. The opening words of the declaration represented the first public expression, so this was the first public expression of support for Zionism by a major political power, right? Before this, it was propaganda. Again, they had orators, which is literally someone who goes out onto a street and they project their voice and they're yelling news, yelling information, spreading news, right? Publicly. but it's literally just people that are set up in communities. This is prior, obviously, to cell phones, to microphones, things of that nature, where that are publicly used, to where this person is just crying aloud where they are. So this is the first major political power that comes out and says, yes, we believe that Zionism is the way. We believe that these are the stipulations that should be met. We believe that this is how it should be supported, things of that nature. The term national home had no precedent in international law and was intentionally vague as to whether a Jewish state was contemplated. So they didn't come out and outright say, hey, the Jewish people, we 100% support the movement of Zionism, and we think that this is the exact place that they need to be. It was just ambiguous, national home. So it says the intended boundaries of Palestine were not specified, right? And the British government later confirmed that the words "in Palestine" meant that the Jewish national home was not intended to cover all of Palestine. So this declaration is written fairly ambiguously, right? Like testing the waters. Well, let me see what we get. They're not going to write the term national home, or excuse me, it had no, national home was written, but it had no precedent in international law. It was intentionally vague, right? Then you had the words "in Palestine," but that doesn't give them automatic rights to all of Palestine. But you could argue, well, if I'm taking up, 90% of the internal boundary of an area, you pretty much own that entire area, but you're inside that area, right? So it says early British political support for an increased Jewish presence in the region of Palestine was based upon geopolitical calculations. Such efforts were premature and did not succeed. Only 24,000 Jews were living in Palestine on the eve of the emergence of Zionism within the world's Jewish communities in the last 2 decades of the 19th century. So that's huge. The Palestine that we know of, the Palestine that everyone, you have so many people nowadays, different people on Instagram, especially, and I'll be mind blown when it's a so-called black person, Latino, talking about free Palestine, right? You're talking about 24,000 people. That's a small community by today's standards, for sure. Maybe if you're in the middle of, a small town, or, there are plenty of small towns to this day, even across America with small populations. But that's a very, very small town. Very small town. In comparison to a lot of the major cities where Israel is, Houston, Texas, Dallas, Texas, Los Angeles, Compton, Hawthorne, New York, Chicago, Detroit, these places, 24,000 is tiny. It's like no one at all. So there were only 24,000 people, Jewish people, living in Palestine at the emergence of Zionism, right? A lot of them were in Germany. A lot of them are in Austria. A lot of them are in Italy, in Spain. They're in the eastern and central parts of Europe, right? They're not by far trying to establish themselves within Israel. They're not by far trying to establish themselves in modern-day Palestine, right? So it wasn't like they already had all these people living in these communities, or all these people living in the home of the Jews, and they're trying to establish themselves, and hey, we're being persecuted, or we're lacking and we don't have the space that we need some type of public support. No, there weren't even very many Jewish people living in Israel, period. This was a declaration not only supported, this was a declaration by a major political party, but even to the Jewish people themselves, it was like this is what we're doing. It wasn't like they were already there trying to establish communities. This was the declaration that gave them the green light to begin to truly try and establish themselves within the boundaries of modern day Palestine, but what we know as Israel. It says such efforts were premature and did not succeed. Only 24,000 Jewish people were living in Palestine on the eve of the emergence of Zionism within the world's Jewish communities in the last 2 decades of the 19th century, with the geopolitical shakeup occasioned by the outbreak of the First World War. The earlier calculations, which had lapsed for some time, led to a renewal of strategic assessments and political bargaining over the Middle and Far East. Right? So, not a whole lot of people. Not a whole lot at all. The declaration continued. The declaration specifically stipulated, and here we go. Hold on, let's take a moment to read this together. Give me 1 second. Says the declaration specifically stipulated that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Isn't that crazy? Right? For everybody that has all this free Palestine in their bio, they're, getting their political information off of the news and social media, and they're protesting and talking about the tragedies and how horrible of an experience this is. Keep in mind, there were only 24,000 Jewish people in Palestine at the time. On top of that, it specifically stated in their own declaration, nothing shall be done which may prejudice. Let's get the definition of prejudice. Prejudice, preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Law, here's the law, the definition as it is used in law. Harm or injury that results or may result from some action or judgment. Look at that. Cause harm to. So they're literally saying in this declaration, there's not going to be anyone who's harmed in our efforts to be able to establish ourselves. Now you have war, people being shot, people being murdered, people being dragged, and all this other type of stuff. But that was not what was originally written, right? The document, however, said nothing of the political or national rights of these communities and did not refer to them by name. So it's like, well, there's protection that's being offered, and, but the actual political and national rights of anyone who's here is not stipulated, and it doesn't name, hey, these people, you have some type of rights. You have some type of public recognition in this article, in this declaration, that protects you from, the immigration that is to take place. That's not the case. Even before the mandate, the desire for a Jewish homeland prompted a small number of Jews to immigrate to Palestine, a migration that grew dramatically during the second quarter of the 20th century with the increased persecution of Jews worldwide and subsequent Holocaust perpetrated by Nazi Germany. So again, there still wasn't a whole lot of people. You're talking about less than 50,000 Jewish people living in Palestine during that time. And it wasn't until massive persecution much later towards World War II that there was a mass exodus out of Germany, out of Austria, out of a lot of the different countries that were in Europe. And so all these Jewish people now suddenly being displaced are looking for a home. And what is that? That's 30 years later? So this declaration had already been written by 1917, but not until World War II, some 30 years later, did people of Jewish, did the Jewish people take this serious and say, okay, we're going to go to Israel, we're going to go to Palestine, and we're going to establish our communities. It was only because the Holocaust and it was dangerous, and there were people being executed, and all these different things that were happening. Then they said, okay, well, we've got to go somewhere. Where should we go? And it's like, oh yeah, we've got that declaration. We've got this land that's been reserved for us. We'll go there. This vast influx of Jewish immigrants into the region, however, caused tension, obviously, with the native Palestinian Arabs, and violence flared between the two groups, leading up to the United Nations plan to partition Palestine into Jewish and Arab sectors and Israel's ensuing declaration of statehood on May 14th, 1948. I do have some maps there. Unfortunately, let me see if I can do that. Well, it's not going to be very practical. It's not going to be very, very practical to pull up those maps, but there is the link if you want to look at some of the regions, the region of Palestine, the regions that were reserved, some maps of the actual wars and some of the conflicts that took place. There is a link at the bottom of the screen if you want to copy that to be able to view. But so, there were Palestinian Arabs already in the area that were already, established. And this was basically like a continuation of a concept that America used coming over to slaughter the Native Americans, manifest destiny. This land belongs to us. It was given to us by God. And so the Palestinians, or the Jewish people, are doing the same thing. They're coming in and they're saying, hey, this land belongs to us. It was given to us by God. And so you need to get out of our land. You need to leave. And, wars broke out because of that. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. I think, I'm actually missed a slide here. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. It says the aftermath. So this is the aftermath of that war. After decades of confrontations between Arabs and Jews under the British Mandate of Palestine, where both communities sought self-determination after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1922. So Lakia, unfortunately, I didn't put this into the PowerPoint, but I'm just going to read this, right? So both of these communities, the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs, and the Jewish, they were both trying to establish themselves after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It's, I don't want to say it's free real estate, but basically there's a huge shift in power. A landmass that was previously controlled and governed by an established kingdom and government has had its government removed and basically disbanded. There's been war. It's a war-torn country at this point because the war lasted years. And other countries, other communities, they're all coming to stake a claim into the land that is still occupied by people, but not by governing power, right? And so it says Arabs and the Jewish under the British Mandate of Palestine, where both communities sought self-determination after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1922. So the Arabs were also looking, hey, there's a whole bunch of land over here. There, we want a slice. Both of these communities are looking to establish themselves, right? It says the United Kingdom announced its intention in 1947 to withdraw its forces from Palestine and endorse United Nations Resolution 181, which we're going to talk about next, which partitioned the British Mandate into a Jewish state and an Arab state. So while all the politics are being ironed out, they're establishing or putting into writing, well, what is going to be what we're going to do, right? There's a Jewish people that are here that are looking to have an established area of land. There's Arabs that are also here that are looking to have an established land. So the United Nations Resolution 181 was then published. United Resolution 181. Resolution passed by the UN General Assembly in 1947 that called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, which the city of Jerusalem as a corpus separatum, which literally means a Latin separate entity. to be governed by a special international regime. The resolution, which was considered by the Jewish community in Palestine to be a legal basis for the establishment of Israel, and which was rejected by the Arab community, was succeeded almost immediately by violence. There's also, that's where the maps come up. There was the ninth, so you can look up into the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. So when these, once the Ottoman Empire had fell, you got World War II, and you have these flood of people coming into Israel, modern-day Palestine. You had massive clashes between these peoples. There were a lot more Arabs at the time that were living in this region, and there were only, again, less than 50,000 Jewish people who were living here. But now, because of the war that was going on pretty much throughout Europe with the Nazis in World War II, you had a mass exodus of Jewish people out of all these European countries into Palestine to establish the communities that were already advocated for by the United Kingdom and Great Britain back in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. Right? So clearly, you have all these people suddenly coming over. We see the same thing today, right? There's wars in these different countries. There's refugees that are coming in, and they're usually met with a lot of resistance, right? They're people who have lost everything. Sometimes people turn to crime. People lose their humanity. People are doing whatever it takes to survive. And a lot of these people were going to Palestine during this time. And then there was a Resolution 181, which was written into law and published by the UN to be able to say, okay, all you Arabs that are already living in Palestine, don't worry about it. Just scoot over and allow this huge chunk of your land and this space to be occupied by the Jewish people. And that wasn't going, the Arabs weren't going for it. It was a problem. So there were quite a few clashes in the Arab-Israeli wars. And again, not in here, but definitely something to look into. Maybe next week, most high willing, we'll talk about the Arab-Israeli wars. So the United Resolution 181, Palestine had been governed by Great Britain since 1922, right after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Since that time, Jewish immigration to the region had increased, and tensions between Arabs and Jews had grown. The Arabs are saying, hey, we've been here for all this time. We have established communities. And if you were an Arab that was living in a space where the government or the UN had suddenly assigned to Jewish people, you would now be, seeing your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors moving out of that area, right? You're seeing people close down their businesses and basically offer up this land, most of which, if I'm not mistaken, already had infrastructure, right? So that was a big problem. A lot of people didn't want to leave. A lot of people didn't want to give up their space. They didn't want to give up their homes, their businesses, buildings that they had built, family investments, all those kinds of things. And that's why there was such a clash of war. It says, in 1947, exhausted by World War II and increasingly intent upon withdrawing from the Middle East region, Britain referred to the issue of Palestine to the UN. So Britain had already gone through, the war with the Ottoman Empire in 1917, World War I, which I believe was just a few years later, and then you had World War II about 20 years later. So Britain at this point, they've been in the Middle East for like 40 years, right? Maybe like 30 years. So they've been, obviously, their resources, their economy strained, and quite literally losing quite a few men within 2 generations, because you had maybe 20-year-old fathers that went to war, and then 20 years later, their sons are adults and they're going to war in the Middle East now. So Britain had given up a lot of its resources and even its actual men of its nation to try and secure to go to war against the Ottoman Empire, to try and secure the land that was once the Ottoman Empire, to establish the Balfour Declaration's stipulations and limitations. And then at this point, they were also at war in the Middle East because of World War II. So they gave this over to the UN, the United Nations, right? To investigate a suitable course of action, the UN formed the UN Special Committee on Palestine, an inquiry committee made up of members from 11 countries. So the UN has a specific, board that specifically represents the interests of Palestine, and with members from 11 countries. Ultimately, UNSCOP delivered two proposals: that the majority, which recommended two separate states, join economically, and that of the minority, which supported the formation of a single binational state. Hold on, so let's break this down. The majority recommended two separate states join economically. So they're basically saying, hey, there's going to be a Jewish state here, and there's going to be an Arab state here, but they're going to have the same, I believe it's called GDP, right? They're going to have the same economy. They're going to share the same money, currency, stock market, all things of that nature, right? They're just two separate states, but they're joined economically. And the minority, which supported the formation of a single binational state made up of autonomous Jewish and autonomous Palestinian areas. So the minority were saying, nah, we don't want to have a Jewish state and an Arab state join economically, with their economy being the same. We want a fully autonomous Jewish state. Our laws affect us. We have our own currency. We have our own, land. We have our own stocks. We have our own GDP. It's like basically dividing the country into two entirely separate autonomous entities, and they want nothing to do with each other. The Arab economy has nothing to do with the Jewish economy. The Jewish economy has nothing to do with the Arab economy. If the Arabs go to war, the Jewish economy is not going to suffer. If the Jewish go to war, the Arab economy is not going to suffer. Right? That was the vote and the intention of the minority of the Committee of UNSCOP. The Jewish community approved of the first of these proposals, while the Arabs opposed them both. So again, the Arabs are like, how is any of this fair, right? We've been here for however long. We were already here because, during the Ottoman Empire. We were here after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and we're basically having to come up with one of two compromises. Either the first compromise, which was supported by the majority, is our economy suddenly becomes split in half, and everything that the Jewish people do, good or bad, right? Whether they go to war and your economy crashes, whether they print too much money, whether they're whatever is going to happen by the Jewish state, the Arabs were going to be affected economically. And so they're like, no, I don't want to do that, because they could easily tank our entire country. They could easily, destroy a lot of the finance and wealth that's been handed down from generation to generation through families and private equity and things of that nature, and they could get control of it all. And then the second one was, okay, well, you be autonomous and we'll be autonomous, but basically you're going to still split a lot of your land to be able to create a space for the Jewish state. And so the Arabs are like, well, none of these. Like, why? On the one hand, I got to split my economy. I'm going to be subject to whatever you guys do, good or bad. I'm going to be subject to whatever your stocks, your bonds, your whatever you establish or don't establish, I'm going to be subject. And the other one is I lose majority of the land that my people have already lived in for so long. So the Arabs didn't like any of the ideas that the UN was presenting with the United Resolution, and they didn't like the propositions, right? It says a counter proposal including a provision that only those Jews who had arrived before the Balfour Declaration and their descendants would be citizens of the state did not win Jewish favor. So the counter to the first two propositions was, how about this, right? Before the Balfour Declaration, there were only like 24,000 Jewish people in this state. So why don't you allow for the 24,000 and all of their descendants? They're the only ones who are actually national citizens. They're the ones that will have rights. They can have an autonomous state if they so choose. they will be citizens as well as their descendants be citizens of the state. But now the Jewish are saying, well, that's not ideal. That means all the other people that are here that have now migrated or immigrated because of war, they're not going to be able to have rights. They're not going to be able to have citizenship. They're not going to be able to actually be a part of parliament and government and things of that nature. The economy, they basically wouldn't have anything that was controlled by themselves. But the vast, or the small minority, which would include the vast majority of the Jewish people that had migrated at this point, they would be given rights. And it's like, well, that doesn't really cover most of the people that are now in Palestine. So this is the United Resolution 181. This was another big thing that drove the independence, the autonomy of the Jewish state, that drove the propositions presented to the Arabs to say what was going to be given and what was not going to be given, and would continue to lead to clashes, continue to lead to battles, political issues. And even till this day, we're still seeing the effects of the Balfour Declaration. We're still seeing the effects of these laws that have been written in, and we're still seeing the effects of the things that were put into place by law almost 100 years ago that the people of that region still cannot agree upon. So, hopefully, and unfortunately, again, I couldn't show the maps. There was a second set of maps at the end of this one, and some more information I want to get off the website. But if you would like, that link is, I'm going to read it. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even put this one here. It is www.britannica, as in the encyclopedia.com/event/Arab-Israeli-wars. The same one from the previous slide if you want to go back and rewind the video. So with that being said, Israel, I hope that this was informative. I hope that this paints a little light or sheds a little light and paints a picture of the dynamic of the history, the culture, the wars, the clashes, and a better understanding of even the conflict that we continue to see to this day, because it is all stemming from the Balfour Declaration and all stemming from the Balfour Declaration and Zionism itself, right? So with that being said, have a great night. Please continue to tune in with us, and shalom.
Cause sheep I pay the cost, me and my lines really live it. I don't need no glory, you don't have to know my story. Glad I made it out this world, cause this world was never for me. I thought that I was. If it wasn't for the Most High who was on my side, man, ain't no telling where I'd be.
Mr. Wilson would've known.
Can't nobody tell me nothing different. The Father's been good to me.
So good to me.
Yeah. Wave your hands if you feel me. I'm a witness. Yahweh's been good to me.
So good to me.
Every morning that I rise, I thank Yahweh that I'm living. Keep my enemies at bay and never leave without my fringes. 1611 with me cause I'm on a mission. Talking sheep, I pay the cost me.